welcome to the second Opposition Day motion on farming and food security. Steve Barclay to move.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Given the increasingly uncertain world we have seen with COVID, Ukraine and now in the Middle East, food security is more important than ever and should be seen as a key part of our national security. Britain's farmers are facing real and immediate challenges, which means the government must take action now, and that's why we have called this debate today. Between October 2022 and March 2024, England experienced the most rain for any 18-month period since records began in 1836. In particular, storms Babbitt and Henk caused significant damage, leaving thousands of acres underwater, with land remaining saturated for prolonged periods. And this has prevented many farmers from getting crops into the ground or compromised those that were able to do so. Now, farmers have, of course, done their best to respond. But recent research from the Energy and Climate Intelligence Unit and the Agriculture and Horticulture Development Board has suggested that England is heading for one of its worst harvests on record. The wheat harvest in England alone is estimated to be more than 2.2 million tonnes down, representing an 18% reduction compared to last year. And the total harvest of the 5 key crops, wheat, winter barley, spring barley, oats and oilseed rape, is set to be down by over 13%, or 3 million tonnes on a 5-year average. This means we risk being increasingly reliant on imports, and unfortunately, it would seem there is no relief in sight, with 10 English counties experiencing their wettest September on record and with input costs continuing to remain high. So if we don't support our farmers now, many farm businesses say they are unlikely to survive. Now, as Secretary of State, I prioritised food production, announcing for farmers at the Oxford Farming Conference more money, more choice and more trust. Increasing the rates paid for SFI and introducing new options to better reflect the range of farms as I announced in January. This continued... Of course I'll go away.
Secretary for giving way and referred to his time in office. And why did his Shadow Secretary and the government of the day fail to get £300 million out of the door and into our farms in constituencies such as mine?
Well, I'll come on to the underspends because it is one of the key dividing lines between this side of the House and there, because I secured with the Treasury that all the underspends from the new schemes coming out of the EU would remain for farmers and for DEFRA and would remain in the DEFRA budget. Now, we will see at the end of this month whether the Secretary of State has secured the same in terms of any underspends there. So we will see that with the budget. Of course, I give way.
Grateful to him for giving way. We know that under the previous government, a whole raft of commitments were made that there was no way of paying for. So there's no credibility to the suggestion. There's no credibility to the suggestion that he secured something from the discredited Treasury that he was under. But the key question here is, if that money was so desperately needed, why wasn't it being spent?
It's coming out of the European Union, new schemes were set up as the SFI, which could support nature, could support farming, and shift from a scheme under the EU where 50% of the money went to 10% of landowners. And we were able to design new schemes, but then we listened to farmers, and that's why I announced at the Farming Conference an increase on average of 10% in payments, 50 more choices to better reflect, for example, the variety farms such as upland farms, and responded. But the key difference was those underspends all remained within the DEFRA budget. And the key question, which I'm sure the Secretary of State will come on to, is he will reassure the House, having just faced the wettest winter in 150 years, the worst rain in 10 counties this September, on record. I'm sure he will want to give a similar commitment to the House that those underspends will remain in DEFRA. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary of State, Shadow Secretary of State, I would like to just add one thing to what he's brilliantly saying, which is that, of course, this is a matter for farmers and in Herefordshire as much as anywhere else. Ross-on-Wye, a rural town, underwater as a result of these floods. Does he share my view that this whole ecosystem ultimately feeds into the river and river pollution, on which he took such a lead with the action plan himself? And does he share my hope that that will be supported by the new government as well as the new river champion that he put in place?
I very much agree, and actually he alludes to one of the key questions that many farmers around the River Wye ask, which is what's happened to the 35 million that was announced for farming support for the River Wye, where again, under this government, there's been so little detail. Again, I hope he'll be able to give some reassurance to my right honourable friend on that, because amongst the support we gave to farmers, Madam Deputy Speaker, we also introduced the biggest package of productivity grants in February to help boost the latest technology deployed on farms so that it could enhance yields. We improved the protections to stop the best land being taken out of food production, including the announcement in May to strengthen guidance on solar farms. And we responded positively to the NFU request I will come back to. We also, just on these measures to support food production, we also responded positively to the NFU request on the annual Food Security Index and also hosted the Farm to Fork Summit in Downing Street. But I know there's a real issue at the moment, a live issue with the clustering of solar farms in some of the best food production land in Lincolnshire. I suspect that might be the issue my right honourable friend wants to address.
I don't want to get into the debate for or against solar farms, but there is whatever your view on it, even if you're in favour of solar farms, surely we should not have a concentration, for instance, 10,000 acres around one town, namely Gainsborough. And when the Secretary of State considers these matters, shouldn't he look at it in the round and take all these applications together?
Well, the Secretary of State should be looking at that, and there's a marked difference between him and I on this. I persuaded the Energy Department to strengthen the guidance against solar farms. He's getting pushed around by his Cabinet colleagues and has already had the Energy Secretary walk all over him by allowing a whole load of solar farms to be granted, including the clustering, which is causing such an issue. And let me give for the House a specific example of just how farming is not being championed by this Secretary of State. One of the real voices for tenant farmers, Baroness Rock, who wrote the review on tenant farming that I commissioned in a previous role when in number 10, has, it seemed, been sacked from the Deaf Board or asked to leave. She was a true voice for tenant farmers within the department, and it'd be helpful if the Secretary of State could say why such a respected and talented figure has had to leave from her role. So a number of things that I'll give way and then I'll make a bit of progress. One last.
I thank the right honourable gentleman for giving way. He's talked about the clustering of solar farms. It's not just the clustering of solar farms which is a problem, though it is a problem. It's the fact that they're being put on land which is of a high grade and a high quality of agricultural value, which is also nonsensical.
It is, and I think a further concern, which I see in my own constituency, Madam Deputy Speaker, is consultants who are working for the developer who do the soil sampling are often felt to be taking an interpretation that is not consistent with local knowledge in terms of the quality and the grading of the soil. But let me, Madam Deputy, turn to some specifics, because back in May, the government allocated £50 million of additional support for farmers hit by the wet weather. Now, extending the Farming Recovery Fund to 1,000 more farmers allowed it to cover all of those affected in England. And on top of that, we also allocated an additional £75 million to internal drainage boards, who many in the House we know are absolutely essential in terms of protecting agricultural land from floods and storms. And that was announced in March. Now, we know with the party opposite, we have a Labour government that neither understands nor cares for rural communities. Well, they weren't so vocal when they launched their manifesto. No. With just 87 words devoted to farming, not a single mention of farming in the King's speech. And that is because they are making an active choice to deprioritise British farming and food production. Now, in terms of the immediate challenge, answers to a recent parliamentary question back up what the sector are telling me. The £50 million of additional Farming Recovery Fund support is yet to be paid out. So we've just established, we've had the wettest weather for 150 years, that 10 counties have had particularly challenging weather. And yet, on a known scheme with an extra £50 million, they haven't allocated this much-needed, time-critical support. And the Secretary of State needs to explain why. Now, the NFU say their members simply cannot wait any longer for this support. Yet Labour seem to want to keep them waiting. And reports suggest the £75 million for the internal drainage boards is also on a go slow. And we need to know why. Now, for the longer term, Labour ministers have overruled officials to cover some of the country's best farmland in solar panels. They've rejected the plans for a binding food security target. And it's even been suggested in media reports that they plan to cut the farming budget by £100 million. Indeed, it was reported that the NFU president has said his members are being kept up at night by the cliff edge Labour's lack of commitment on the agricultural budget is causing. So this government needs to change course. It needs to give immediate confidence to the sector and to show that they care about food security. And to do so, they need today to commit to 5 things. 1, that the full £50 million of additional wet weather support we announced in May will be paid out in full. 2...
Honourable member give way?
Of course I'll. With a... They can wait, Simon.
I think as the first ever female director of the National Farmers Union in 100 years, I can speak with some credibility here. I represent Tiverton and Minehead, which includes the Quantox and Exmoor. I have to say you have some chutzpah. My farmers tell me that you sold them down the river. And I'm saying to my honourable members on the other side, we need to work together on this because our lot know more about farming than you do.
And members, the use of the word you means me. Steve Barclay.
I would never suggest such things of you, Madam Deputy, but also I couldn't quite spot the question there. It seemed rather a statement. But I'm sure in Tiverton, like farms around the country, they want to know where the £50 million that was allocated in May, why that is not being allocated. And the Lib Dems might not care about that money, but I know on these benches we want that support for farmers. Second, the £75 million of support for internal drainage boards. That needs to be deployed in full and without delay. Third, the £220 million allocated for technology and productivity schemes needs to be honoured in full. 4, they need to confirm there'll be no cuts to the farming budget, the issue that is causing so much concern, so we don't lose the £2.6 million that has been allocated for this year. And 5, we need a commitment from them that they will keep the Farm to Fork Summit in Downing Street, they'll have the Food Security Index, and that they will appoint a tenant farming commissioner. And looking further ahead, the government must do more to give farmers confidence. And that means ruling out the removal or reduction of the agricultural property relief, better protecting farmland from schemes for solar and pylons, and ensuring food production is central to the land use framework. And only by doing those things can they show that they are backing our farmers and protecting food security. But sadly, I fear an urban-centric government simply won't do it, not least with a Labour Secretary of State who is currently getting pushed around by his cabinet colleagues. It is only this Conservative team who are and will be a voice for rural businesses, for rural communities and for our rural way of life, and with farming and food production at its very heart.
The question is as on the order paper. Secretary of State, Steve Reid.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the opportunity to restate this government's support for farmers who produce the food that feeds the nation and protect our beautiful countryside. Farmers are the beating heart of rural communities across the country, promoting economic growth and stewarding our land. Food security is national security in our increasingly unstable world. But I am a little surprised the Conservative called this debate after they completely failed our farmers and undermined Britain's food security. After 14 years of Tory chaos, Confidence among farmers is at a record low. Over 12,000 farmers and agri-businesses have been forced out of business since 2010. They left a lack of infrastructure to protect farmers from extreme weather and no action at all to reduce soaring energy costs. This government will correct the mistakes of the past. Farming and food security, I will give way.
Could the Secretary of State possibly give me some comfort that the money that was allocated for the action plan for the River Wye will be retained, even if not necessarily for the purposes that it was created for, and also that he will reappoint the current champion for the river, who has been doing some excellent work so far?
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman's intervention and indeed the representations that he's made to me personally on this issue. I know he feels very passionately about it, and indeed it is a very important issue. I'm afraid we'll need to wait until the conclusion of the spending review, which is normal practice in government, but his words have been heard and his concerns recognised. Farming and food security are the foundations of our economy, our communities, and indeed of our environment. Farmers were badly let down by the previous government, who offered only sticking plasters to deal with the great challenges faced by British farming. This government will work with farmers to help them transition to new farming methods that are more sustainable, both financially and environmentally. We will reduce the soaring energy prices that have hit so many food producers so hard. No more dodgy trade deals that undermine British farmers. This will be a government on the side of Britain's farmers. I'll give way.
Grateful to give you way. He's right to say farmers are very important parts of the community. His leader, the Prime Minister, said to the NFU last year that a solar farm should not be created by taking advantage of tenant farmers. This is a live issue in my constituency and many others, where tenant farmers will be deprived of their livelihood by new solar farms. Would he stand up for that commitment and say quite clearly to his cabinet colleagues that tenant farmers must not lose their livelihood by the creation of a solar farm?
I recognise the issue the honourable gentleman is making, and I thank him for his intervention. I will be making comments further along in my speech about further support that we would wish to offer to tenant farmers. I do recognise the situation that they're in. Our new deal for... I'll take the point.
Secretary of State for giving way. On the 13th of September, I met with my local NFU and a whole group of farmers, and they're desperate, both to see the recovery fund monies dispersed and see the support for the internal drainage board. Could the Secretary of State please put their minds at rest in this absolute crisis situation they find themselves in, and commit to make sure that money does flow, and we don't hear talking about the budget. We need action now to support those people. If his words on energy security and the centrality of farming to this country are to be more than that.
It is regrettable that this government inherited from the previous government flood defences in the worst condition ever recorded. But of course I recognise that farmers need support, but they need long-term support, not just the sticking plaster approach that we had from the previous government. So we will be looking at how we can do that. The Environment Agency has already made 37 million available, but as we work through, so support will be available to farmers that are facing flooding in the here and now, but it will be in the spending review that we will be looking to how we can provide that longer-term support so that we can give farmers and indeed other businesses and homeowners protection from the kind of severe weather events that we are seeing much more frequently due to climate change.
Secretary of State. Secretary of State explains to the House what he's doing and what he will do. Would he spare a thought for the farmers of Northern Ireland, where our agri-food industry is shaped and controlled not by laws that this House makes, not by laws that the devolved Parliament makes, but by laws made by a foreign parliament, namely the European Parliament. And in over 300 areas of law, 120 of them affecting our agri-food industry, that's how our laws are made. How is that even approaching being democratic? And how is agri-food in Northern Ireland meant to be shaped to meet its needs if its own representatives can't even make or change the laws that govern it?
I'm very pleased. I'm thanking for his intervention. I'm very pleased to say I've already had 2 meetings with the Environment Minister from Northern Ireland so that we can talk about how we can better cooperate to support farmers in Northern Ireland. I've also been speaking with the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, who shares that same interest. Yeah.
I thank the Secretary of State for giving way. Farmers and families across my constituency have again recently been hit by devastating flooding. Would the Secretary of State agree with me that the continuing reoccurrence of these issues highlights the failure of the last government for far too long to take flooding seriously? And can we reassure farmers and families right across my rural community that he'll be taking all of the action needed to drive the coordinated, multi-agency response needed, not just in the aftermath of flooding, but to ensure proper mitigants to put in place over longer term too?
I do thank my honourable friend for his intervention. I had the pleasure of visiting his constituency and a farm in his constituency during the election campaign. I recognise absolutely the point that he's making. It is a little hypocritical, isn't it, for the party opposite to complain that not enough is being done for flooding when it's their government that left flood defences in the worst condition ever recorded. So I thank him. I will now make a little progress. I think people will accept I've taken quite a few interventions. I would like to make a little progress so other members can get into this debate as well. Our New Deal for farmers will boost Britain's food security, protect our environment and drive rural economic growth by tackling the root causes of the long-term issues they face. Climate change, rising prices for energy, feed and fertiliser, unfair supply chains and access to labour. We will make sure environmental land management schemes work for farmers. And where funding is allocated for farmers, we will make sure it reaches farmers, ending the Tory underspends that saw hundreds of millions of pounds held back. We will improve these schemes by working with farmers to boost food security and promote nature's recovery, including upland, lowland, grass and tenant farmers. Upland farmers have been left behind. Farmers in the uplands have been losing their basic payments each year but haven't been able to access new schemes. We've arrived in office to find no credible plan to address this, leaving thousands of the most remote and isolated farmers without a clear path for their families, businesses or communities. We need a fair approach for all farmers.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. We all understand that he has inherited a panoply of different crises, from the crisis facing our farmers to flooding and many others within his department. But he's absolutely right. The Environmental Land Management Scheme, trying to get that delivering what was originally intended for it, is one of the biggest issues facing Britain's farmers. I appreciate it's very early days, but what can he tell us about what his sense is as to what the major failures are right now, and what sort of things might we look forward to in terms of his plan to sort it out?
Well, I think the environmental land management schemes actually are taking the right approach, but they need to work better for all farmers. There are too many farmers that feel they can't access them or don't get the support that they need. My proposal is not that the government will dictate to farmers how those changes should happen, but that we should work with farmers in a partnership to hear their voices and allow them to influence these changes to those schemes that will make them more effective for the, frankly, many outcomes that we seek to get from that government funding. We won't be telling farmers how to farm. We will achieve this by working together with them in that new partnership I was talking about. I recently met with the Tenant Farmers Association to hear their views about improving support for tenant farmers. I agree the proposal for a tenants farming commissioner has merit, and we will be making an announcement shortly. Our new deal will protect farmers from being undercut in trade deals. The Conservative government's trade deal with Australia and New Zealand is a disaster for British farmers. They were sold down the river as the party opposite allowed the import of food produced to standards so low they would be unacceptable in this country. Instead of backing British farmers, the Conservatives undermined British farmers. We want to see more support for British farmers, more opportunities for British farmers, not fewer. We've already delivered early first steps for British farmers, securing access to the US market for UK beetroot growers and to the South African market for poultry producers. Instead of the botched Tory Brexit deal that threw up barriers to trade and blocked great British food exports, we will seek a new veterinary agreement with the EU to tear those barriers down and get our food exports moving again, putting money straight into the pockets of British farmers.
Very grateful for giving me a second time. He talks about the importance of farmers to communities, particularly intergenerational farmers. We understand that agricultural property relief there is consideration of withdrawing that in the budget at the end of October. Can he confirm that will not happen? Because if that did happen, it would be an end to intergenerational farming in this country.
I understand the point that he's making and the importance of intergenerational farming, but he'll understand that I can't anticipate the outcome of the budget process.
I don't know, friend, for giving way. Does he agree with me about the urgency of an SPS deal and indeed probably rejoining the Pan-European Mediterranean Convention because of the damage being done to British farmers by the Brexit border taxes? The National Farmers Union tried to warn the Shadow Secretary about this, and facing an existential threat because they can't import the seeds that they need, the tomato seeds, the pepper seeds, the oilseed rape. And what we're now hearing from the ports is very few checks are being done, so it makes a mockery of the idea it produces any food security. Does he agree with me that when the Shadow Secretary of State makes these lists of what could happen, apologising for the mess they made at the border should be at the top of the list?
My honourable friend, as always, makes a very important point, very, very eloquently. During the election campaign and before and since, I've spoken to farmers up and down the country, absolutely furious that having been promised continued access to the European markets where they were selling their great high-quality British produce, instead trade barriers were thrown up and they could no longer sell into those markets, taking the financial hit. We will be seeking to correct that by seeking a new veterinary deal with the European Union to get those exports moving across the borders again. We will not allow food producers to continue to bear the brunt of unfair supply chains. Farmers deserve a fair price for the food they produce, and we will bring forward proposals to make sure that happens. One of the biggest cost rises affecting British farmers has been energy bills. We will prevent future price shocks by switching on GB energy so we can harness the power of wind, wave, solar and nuclear energy to keep bills down and take back control of our own energy supplies from foreign fossil fuel dictators like Vladimir Putin.
I thank the Right Honourable for giving way. He's talked about the importance of cheap energy, he's also talked about solar, and he's talked about the importance of food security. Clearly land needs a balance. What representations has he made to the Energy Secretary to be clear that the best land, the best farmland, shouldn't be used for ground-mounted solar?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her intervention, and indeed she's made the point to me on previous occasions. But I would reassure her that even at its most ambitious extent, solar farms would not cover more than 1% of agricultural land. And for farmers, climate change is a significant concern as well. The reason we're seeing the heavy rainfall we're seeing is because of climate change. That is what is leading to the flooding and the droughts that is damaging farmers. If we don't take action to transition to a clean energy economy, then farmers will continue to suffer from the things that none of us would wish to see them having to deal with. Now, we will use... I'll take one more intervention, then I'll continue. Yeah.
As a dairy farmer and as a tenant farmer, perhaps I have a unique experience in this, but obviously I'm Welsh as well, so I realise that agriculture is devolved in Wales. But this involves, of course, the Brexit situation we find ourselves in and the aftermath of that. And under the EU Common Agricultural Policy, Wales received around 9.5% of the total UK CAP budget, which was based on what we have in Wales, on our rural lifestyle, the farming criteria, such as the size and the number and the nature of the farms. If these allocations are to be calculated using the Barnett formula and using population figures instead, we would only have 5.6% of the total agricultural budget. So can the
interventions need to be short.
This is my question, sorry. Can the Secretary of State, I'm sorry, I'm very new and I apologise for that. Can the Secretary of State guarantee that Wales will not miss out on any increases in the UK funding settlement for agriculture and rural development due to the reduced allocation? Diolch.
I thank you for your intervention. I can reassure I've had multiple conversations with the Welsh Deputy First Minister, who's also the Environment Minister in Wales, to make sure that those concerns are heard as we go through the spending review process. It's always difficult in the couple of weeks run up to the budget because she'll understand I can't give definitive answers, but that will become clear once the Chancellor has made her statement towards the end of the month. I was going to move on to say that we will use the government's own purchasing power to buy more British produce for our hospitals and prisons, putting money directly into the pockets, again, of our British farmers. Now, crime was another issue that under the Conservatives was running out of control. And no wonder after they took so many police off our streets. Crime in rural areas skyrocketed by almost a third since 2011. Our new deal for farmers will see the first ever cross-government rural crime strategy to crack down on antisocial behaviour, fly tipping and GPS theft, all issues that have been repeatedly raised with me by farmers and people living in rural communities. If just allow me, I need to make a little progress because I've taken up an awful lot of time and only got about halfway through and I want to make sure there's time for other members to speak. It should be of huge concern to every one of us that the suicide rate among male farmers is 3 times the national average and the highest amongst any sector in the economy. I want to take this opportunity to pay tribute to the mental health charity Rabi for their excellent work in tackling this alarming and unacceptable situation. We will tackle the mental health crisis in our rural communities by recruiting 8,500 more mental health professionals across the NHS and setting up a Young Futures mental health hub for under 25s in every rural community. Now, within fewer than 100 days in office, I chaired the first meeting of the new Flood Resilience Task Force. After years when funding allocated for flood defences was left unspent, we will speed up the construction of flood defences, drainage systems and natural flood schemes so we can offer better protection for farmers and rural communities from extreme weather into the long term. Members are aware that the government is currently conducting a spending review to fix the foundations of our economy after the previous government crashed the economy and left behind a staggering £22 billion black hole in the public finances. While it's not funny what they did, it's not funny the problems that has caused the British farmers and people living in our rural communities. I think they should show a little more humility after what they did. But while that process is live, there is little I can say on individual areas of spending. What I can say is that we recognise the challenges caused by the wet weather earlier in the year and indeed in recent years. This is just one challenge among many for farmers right now. A few weeks ago, I met with a farmer in Essex who has a case of blue tongue in his herd. I am grateful to farmers for complying with movement restrictions intended to stop the spread of this disease. We will confirm plans for the Farming Recovery Fund and investment in internal drainage boards and other grants as we complete the budget process. We'll also work with farmers to reduce agricultural water pollution from runoff, looking at ways to improve their nutrient management and improve the effectiveness of regulations. Now, boosting productivity in farming is hugely important. Grants and direct investment are part of achieving that, but we need to think bigger and look for more enduring solutions. Yes, I'll give way.
Thank my honourable friend for giving way. The Conservatives sold farmers out, undercutting with dodgy trade deals to New Zealand and Australia. Returning to his previous point, this government has secured access to the US market for UK beetroot growers worth approximately £100,000 per year in increased exports. Does he agree with me that the contrast in trade agreements could not be starker? Labour protects farmers. In trade deals, the Conservatives sells farmers down the river.
I'd like to tell the honourable gentleman I happily agree with the points that he's making. This party is on the side of farmers. The UK has world-class science and innovation capabilities. Developing new technology and techniques for use by farmers and growers will be critical for our food security, for business resilience to climate change and for promoting economic growth. We've set up a new British Infrastructure Council to steer private investment in rural areas, including investment in broadband rollout across our rural communities and electricity grids to power our growth. We are reforming the apprenticeship levy to improve rural apprenticeships and skills and give farmers the freedom and flexibility to upskill their workforce, and opening specialist technical excellence colleges to match skills to local economies. Now, a few weeks ago, my honourable friend, the Minister for Farming and Food Security, tabled a statement on the previous government's astonishing underspends in the farming budget. They failed to get £300 million that was allocated for farmers into the hands of farmers. I am working with Treasury ministers to ensure farmers have the public investment they need. And although the public inheritance, the financial inheritance from the previous government is appalling, there is no shortage of positive things the farming budget can and will deliver. Cleaner air, cleaner water, food security, abundant wildlife and biodiversity, thriving and connected rural communities, the foundation of a sector covering billions of pounds and the largest manufacturing sector in the country. I can assure this House I am making the strongest case for that funding, despite the financial black hole and flatlining economy the Conservatives left behind. Food security is national security. And of course, energy security is also national security. This government will deliver the mandate we were elected on. Our plans to boost solar power do not risk the UK's food security. Even in the most ambitious scenarios, the total area of the UK's agricultural land used for solar would still occupy less than 1%. More broadly, there are challenges and trade-offs. Land is finite, but there are increasing pressures that we make upon it. That is why, I'm going to finish my speech now if you don't mind, that is why this government will do what the previous government failed to do and achieve despite repeated promises. We will publish a land use framework, providing more clarity and starting a conversation on land use and how we can maintain food production, restore nature and grow the economy. Madam Deputy Speaker, farmers do a fantastic job for our country. They produce the food we eat, they steward our beautiful countryside. They deserve our support, but the previous government let them down. Our New Deal for farming will offer farmers a fresh start. Action to cut energy bills, action on rural crime, action to open markets to trade and to export, action to cut the appalling levels of mental ill health that affect farmers right across our country. I welcome this debate and the chance to restate this government's support for farmers. After 14 years of failure, change has begun.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Tim Farron.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's an honour to take part in this debate and to speak not just on behalf of my party, but as the Member of Parliament, humbled and utterly privileged to be so, for farmers from the Cartmel Peninsula, to the Eden Valley, the Yorkshire Dales, the Westmorland Dales, the Lake Districts, and 1,500 wonderful farmers throughout the length and breadth of Westmorland and Lonsdale. I'm not here, particularly, to say, at least not primarily, how great the Liberal Democrats are. That is, I'm sure, self-evident. I am here to state how utterly, unspeakably valuable farmers and farming is and are. Valuable to producing the food that we all eat. If you've eaten anything today, thank farmer, utterly valuable in our fight against climate change, on the front line tackling the threat of climate change, being our best answer to the nature and biodiversity crisis that we have in our land, to being those who will protect the towns and villages near the countryside from the horrors and the expensive and heartbreaking horrors of flooding, indeed being those who will support and protect our heritage, and in my constituency, in particular, underpinning our remarkable tourism economy. Across the country, tourism and hospitality are our fourth biggest employer. In Cumbria, it is our biggest employer. 60,000 people work within the industry, a £4.5 billion economy, and undoubtedly farming is the backbone, is the backdrop, is the underpinning to that wonderful and important tourism and hospitality economy. And farmers need to hear this. Farmers need to hear that they're valued by this place and by this country, because I tell you what, they do not feel it, Madam Deputy Speaker. They feel beleaguered, yes, beleaguered by things that are acts beyond our control of the weather and global shocks, which absolutely are undoubtedly causing huge pressure in amongst farmers, but also deeply beleaguered by public and government policy. We have an agricultural policy minted by the previous Conservative government, and for the time being at least still maintained by this Labour government, which, and this is the maddest thing I've heard myself say in this place, and I've said some mad things, an agricultural policy that is based on disincentivising the production of food. Can we believe that is literally the case? A policy created by that party, for the time being, maintained at least by the party now currently in power. And the consequence of this is that we will only have, 55% of the food that we eat in this country is produced in this country. Talking to Adam Day, who is from the Cumbrian Farmers Network, is reported in the Farmers Guardian. These are absolutely legitimate figures. We have a year-on-year reduction in the number of sheep in this country of 4.2%. I tell you what, Madam Deputy Speaker, if you destock the fells of animals, you soon after destock the countryside of human beings. This is a deep threat to our ability to feed ourselves. I'm content to give way.
Right, well, Gentleman for giving way. Following his remarks with a great deal of interest, would you agree with me that the vast majority of people in this country, given the choice, would rather buy British food? Certainly, all the surveys that have been done would bear that out. But one of the principal problems is the information that they're provided with by the supermarkets, and the cynical way, I'm afraid, that many of those supermarkets approach the labelling of food, suggesting it's British when in fact it is not. What does he suggest we do to give the consumer, who has not yet been mentioned in this debate, the sort of genuine choice that they're seeking and help our farmers along the way?
Or the NFU's call for accurate labelling which is enforceable, and he's right to say that. And let's just move on. If we're losing farms and losing farmers, and which we are as we speak, then not only are we losing our ability to feed ourselves as a country, we're undermining our ability to deliver for the environment. Let's not fall into the mistake, the mistake of thinking this is a debate between caring for the environment and producing food. We either do them both or we don't do them at all. 70% of Britain's landmass, England's landmass, is agricultural. It'll be greater across the UK as a whole, is agricultural. If we think we're tackling the climate or nature crises without farmers, we are kidding ourselves. The greenest policies in the world will be just bits of paper in a drawer if we don't have the farmers on the ground to put them into practice. Very happy to give way.
Thank you for giving way. My intervention relates to that. Farmers in Freeman, East Somerset, like many farmers, work tirelessly to produce food for our country. But as my honourable friend agrees, it's vital we also acknowledge the role they play in restoring nature and mitigating the effects of climate change. And would you also agree that the government needs to support farmers to develop natural climate solutions to restore nature?
I completely agree with that. And it actually leads me to what I'm about to say next, and that is to praise Michael Gove. And to say that the Environmental Land Management Scheme that was created at the beginning of the last Parliament has an awful lot going for it. And actually there's cross-party support for the idea of public money for public goods, as my honourable friend absolutely rightly points out. I will say this, we've searched high and low maybe for Brexit benefits. This is one of them, potentially. The Common Agricultural Policy was riddled with all sorts of failures, some of which have been mentioned already. ELMS is a possibility to have a bespoke farming, agricultural, environmental policy that actually delivers what we want in the places that we want it. And absolutely, providing environmental goods is absolutely part of that. but a positive idea, all party support, botched by the last administration. A £2.4 billion budget for England alone, eroded, of course, over 5 years by inflation, by all the shocks we've talked about already, and yet, even that pitiful and frozen budget by the last government, £358 million underspent. What does that mean? It reduces our ability to feed ourselves as a country. It reduces our ability to restore nature. It reduces our ability to tackle climate change. And we didn't spend this money because farmers didn't need it, but because of a surplus of complacency from a Conservative Party that thought the countryside would always vote for them, because of a lack of care for farmers and for their families and for their communities, and from a fundamental absence of competence. And so my message to the Secretary of State is this, and to the Treasury, and to the Prime Minister, and to every Labour MP, please, 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 do not let the Treasury take financial advantage of Tory incompetence. Do not take in or bake in the underspend. Do not, Secretary of State, please give in to number 11 and to number 10. Protect this budget. Without that public money, we will not get those public goods. Defend, fight your corner. I'm pleased to hear him say that he will do so. But in fighting your corner, his corner, you'll be fighting the countryside's corner, and I want to support you in that if he will do that. Let us understand that I would like the party in government to understand why it is the Conservatives botched the transition and why that money did not get spent. One of the few efficient things the previous administration did was get rid of, on time, without any delay, the basic payment. That happened without any problems whatsoever. What did happen, or didn't happen at the same time, was the adequate rolling out of the new ELMS payments, in particular SFI. We had a stop-start approach, and many people, for example, on historic stewardship schemes, simply not able to get into SFI. I was at the Westmorland County Show just a few weeks ago, and I spoke to a hill farmer, and I mentioned this particular case because it is so typical of all the others that I've spoken to in my constituency and beyond. A youngish hill farmer in his 40s, he says to me that he has lost, or he will have lost by the end of the process, £40,000 in basic payments in his annual income. He will gain £14,000 in SFI, and by the way, that cost him £6,000 in agent fees to get into. So a net loss every year of £26,000. That is typical. That is why there's an underspend. Please don't bake it in. The Secretary of State quite rightly spoke about mental health, and I just want to say this time of flux and change, I have never worried more about the mental health of my constituents and of farmers in particular. I'll do both. One there and one there. Yes, go on. Yes.
Thank you. The suicide rate amongst male farmers is 3 times the national average. The party opposite left rural communities like mine facing a mental health crisis. A close family friend of mine, Rocky Poulsen, took his own life just 4 days after a farm inspection found 18 of his sheep were tagged with the wrong coloured ear tags, leaving him facing criminal sanctions and the embarrassment of this amongst his friends and colleagues.
I respectfully suggest to the Honourable Lady and all members she should be sitting if I'm standing. Interventions should be short, they should be spontaneous, they certainly should not be read out as if they were part of a speech. The Honourable Lady, I'm sure, has made her point. Tim Farron.
He has, and I completely sympathise, in particular with her and all around her, over the loss of her friend. I will happily give way.
I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable for giving way. He makes an important point about young farmers and mental health, and I know there's a brilliant project in his patch called Growing Well. Does he agree with me that the young farmers of this generation are very different from those who I grew up with, who were very much chemical farmers post-war? This generation believe in habitat, they believe in conservation, and all they ask for through ELMS is a strategic framework that they can grow their businesses in long term, and that is the best security we can give them.
Yes, I agree with that also, and I thank you for raising Growing Well at both sides and at Tawe, and the fantastic job that they do there in building mental health and connecting it with the countryside. The point I want to make about mental health is just I want to, for people particularly who aren't from rural constituencies, I just want to imagine what it is like to be in this time of flux and change, when you see the money going out the door and you don't see it coming in. So typically, yes, so many farmers are male. They'll be my age or yet even older than me. And they will be maybe, I don't know, 5th, 6th, 7th generation that have farmed that farmstead. And they see the very real prospect of them being the one who loses the family farm. What does that do to your head? And we've heard the horrific consequences of what that does to people's heads. And we need to love and cherish and care for our farmers and recognise the terrible situation they're in at this moment of flux. Yeah, I'll take a...
And I thank the member for giving way. As a past president of the Young Farmers Clubs of Ulster, I think that the point the member makes is very apt. 95% of farmers under 40 at this minute in time across the UK actually say mental health is their biggest concern. And it's not only about losing the family farm, it's about worrying where the next payment comes. It's about that reliance, about what they do for the next generation and the ones that come before them and the ones that come after them as well. So mental health is a real problem, and I'm disappointed that the Secretary of State in his contribution didn't get into any great detail in that and seemed to skip over it.
Yeah, thank you for making that point. So I think hopefully we've established then that we need to care for those who feed us and care for our environment. Farmers need friends, and so let me mention one potential very important friend, and that is the Prime Minister. Now, during the general election, people may be aware that the Prime Minister turned up in my constituency, which, given that I am claimed to fame, the only constituency in the entire United Kingdom where Labour lost the deposit. And by the way, my Labour opponent was excellent, Pippa, nothing to do with her. But he came to the constituency, to the Langdale Valley, and despite the fact I'm a Blackburn Rovers fan, I was pleased to see Gary Neville there. And I saw, people remember the party political broadcast that Labour had during the election campaign, and indeed the Prime Minister's speech at Labour conference recently, where he talked about the importance of the Langdale Valley to him personally growing up and the development of who he is. And I'll tell you what, I was personally moved by that, and as the Member of Parliament for the Langdale Valley, I am grateful to him for saying that. Langdale needs friends. This is a moment when Langdale could do with the most important of friends, particularly when it comes to spending money. I'm going to read out some words from a hill farmer relating to the Prime Minister's comments about his upbringing in the Langdale Valley. He says, he puts it like this. He was moved that the Prime Minister championed Langdale so well. And then he said, but farming communities in Langdale and other upland areas are facing severe financial hardship, with many wondering if they will survive. They've now lost 50% or more of the basic payment scheme integral to their income. It'll all be gone soon. These farmers are almost all in old environmental stewardship schemes, which means they've been hardly able to access anything from the new Elm scheme and from sustainable farming incentive. Not because they don't want to, but because the computer says no and because of agency issues in DEFRA. Prime Minister, if you love Langdale, please would you prove it by making sure that we invest in hill farmers and in farming more generally. What the last government got wrong, we focused on. I'd be happy to go away to my neighbour.
I'd like to thank you for allowing me to intervene. I'm a fellow Cumbrian MP, grew up in the Lake District, so I was pleased to see the Prime Minister's story of an area that I know and love as well. Would the Honourable Member agree with me that during the Shadow Minister's introduction to this debate, we were challenged over our budget, but I think the real issue that I hear of farmers in Cumbria is it's one thing to have a budget, but if you can't get it out the door, it's pretty meaningless. Would the Honourable Member agree with me that that's the real challenge?
It is the real challenge, and in which case we need to make sure there's more money in the budget to allow welfare schemes, support to make sure farmers can carry on farming. If you're taking the basic payment out relentlessly without anything to replace it, don't surprise if there's carnage. And if we, in terms of personal carnage and tragedies, but also reduction in our ability to feed ourselves as a country. Let's just concentrate for a moment or two before I shut up and talk about what we could do to put things right. Well, first of all, the Liberal Democrats believe wholeheartedly in our costed manifesto that there should be an additional £1 billion in the budget to make sure because we recognise we can't restore nature, tackle climate change or produce food on the cheap. We want to use at least some of that money to invest in trusted on-farm advice, because one of the problems is, a Conservative member earlier on made the point about how much of the EU money went to big landowners. The problem is in the current situation, it's even worse. So who's not getting in? Smaller farmers. If you're working 90 hours a week on your farm, you haven't got time to go and get informed and to engage in the process outside. You need someone you trust on your farm to hold your hand through the process to get into this new world so there is a future for you and for your family. That's where some of that money needs to go. We need to recognise that so much of the money has disproportionately gone to big landowners, public and private big landowners. The BBC reported, and I know this to be true, that one estate only, one landowner only in April 24 evicted 65 tenants in one single month, giving people notice to quit that estate. Even worse, therefore, is the distribution of money between the richer farmers and the poorer than it was under CAP, and you never thought that would even be possible. So we are seeing something which I do not in any way likely describe as the Lakeland clearances. And as we lose livestock, we lose people too, as I said. And I want to say something else positive about, I've already mentioned at least one Conservative positively, Baroness Rock, who did a tremendous job in the Tenant Farming Review. Actually, the Shadow Secretary's predecessor did not meet her in all of her time in that position, and it's important that the new government, I'm very concerned that she's got the sack or whatever it is that's happened, she's been removed from her role. That report is hugely important. Tenants need protecting and there must be a Tenants Farm Commissioner. I would urge the government to take on Baroness Rock's report and recommendations in full without any kind of mitigation, any kind of equivocation. Let's make sure then, another thing the government could do is make sure that people who are in stewardship schemes are allowed into SFI. Let's make sure that farming in protected landscapes, really important grant scheme, is renewed. Its current end date is the end of March. And let's fundamentally do something very radical but blindingly obvious. Let us make food a public good. That is, make sure that our agricultural policy actually encourages people to make and produce food. It's not just about the transition. People have talked about the trade deals where the Conservative government threw under the bus Britain's farmers, but it also includes the lack of access to our nearest markets that some on the government benches have already mentioned, how important it is that we restore and normalise relationships with our biggest export market over the Channel. So the Conservatives will carry the record of the betrayal and the taking for granted of our rural communities in general and farmers in particular, like an albatross around their neck, for a generation. I'll be happy to give way.
Thank you very much to the Honourable Member. Could I invite the Honourable Member to agree with me that one of the elements of that betrayal was on rural crime, where we saw an increase again in the last 12 months? And will he join with me in congratulating Cumbria's rural crime team on their one-year anniversary and in supporting this government's commitment to finally reversing the disgraceful trend in the rise in rural crime that we saw under the last government?
Yes, and I think one of the things that my honourable friend says...
Remarks, I'd just like to point out that the front benches have used about 20 minutes each, and I'm sure he's coming to a close.
Very generous, and she's been even more so. A minute and I'm done. So look, yeah, I agree with her. Let's. My concern is this: yes, Conservative betrayal will weigh around their neck for a generation because farmers have long memories, and rightly so. But if Labour bakes in the Conservative failure into their spending plans, then they will be hung out. They will not only hang out to dry Britain's farmers, they will hang out their own newly elected members of Parliament. Rural communities need champions. Liberal Democrats will be those champions. We will make a conscious choice to step into the void that rural communities need, to be the voice for farmers and for the whole of our countryside, because we value our farmers whose job it is to give, or is whose job list every day is to feed the country and to save the planet. What a mission. It is our duty and our privilege to support them in that mission.
Before I call the next speaker, the front benches have used up a significant amount of time, aided and abetted, you can all sit down, I have to say, by excessively long interventions, some from members who've not hung around in the chamber for very long after they've made them. It is a courtesy to the chair and indeed to the front benches that members who wish to contribute in debates be here for the start. So those who were not will not get called today because we have very little time left. Can I call John Whitby to make his maiden speech?
Madam Deputy Speaker, it is a genuine honour to address yourself and this House today. It's not just a privilege to represent the Derbyshire Dales, it's a privilege just to be there, because it is truly an area of outstanding natural beauty, known to many of you, I'm sure, because it's a destination for millions. But its great appeal also presents a problem for younger people in particular, looking for housing. The little house building that takes place is more or less matched by the number of properties lost to second homes and holiday lets and Airbnbs. And this results in the highest house prices in the region and puts them out of the reach of many young people who end up moving to other areas to find more affordable housing, which in turn means fewer young families, fewer children, and schools with falling numbers on roll. Small businesses suffer as well, including farms, pubs and restaurants, as they struggle to get staff due to the lack of affordable accommodation nearby. It is vital that we address this housing crisis. I want to pay tribute to my predecessor, Sarah Dines, who I know stood up in particular for the farming community in the Dales, something that I very much hope to continue. And I've had the pleasure of meeting her predecessor, Lord Patrick McLaughlin, who is in the other place, and I hope to benefit from his vast experience of the constituency. The main industries in the Dales are, not surprisingly, tourism, leisure and hospitality, quarrying and, of course, agriculture. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm very hopeful that the new government can secure a veterinary agreement with the European Union to give our struggling farmers a boost. I've spent much of my first few weeks in the role speaking to farmers to really try and understand what the key issues are for them. Food security in an increasingly unstable world has to be a high priority. The Dales has great historical significance. According to the Anglo-Saxon chronicles, in the 10th century, the northern kings met Edward the Elder at the Bakewell Burh and chose him as father and lord, effectively creating the entity that we call England. Arkwright's mill at Cromford is the birthplace of mass production, and of course it was powered by renewable energy. I recently met with the Arkwright Society, who are restoring the site for the benefit of future generations and doing a great job. And I also recently met with Jamie Needle, who has taken on Masson Mill, another of Arkwright's mills, and he is also concerned with the delivery of hydroelectric power from the Derwent. What goes around comes around. Stone from Derbyshire quarries was used in the reconstruction of Parliament in the 19th century, and the very founder of modern nursing, Florence Nightingale, lived in the constituency at the family residence at Lea Hurst. She said, "Nursing is a progressive art, such that to stand still is to go backwards." Madam Deputy Speaker, today's health service is barely standing still. We need to reduce the waiting list and get as many of the 3 million working age people back to work as soon as possible. I know from my time being the Mayor of Derby that there is so much good being done on a daily basis that never makes the headlines because good deeds don't appear to sell newspapers or attract advertising. But in my few weeks in the role, I've already met some remarkable people and organisations who are making a difference in the constituency and further afield. Aquabox are a Cromford charity with over 80 volunteers who supply clean water solutions to people in disaster zones. Terry Eckersley at River Network provides social housing and a second chance to people in need. The Bakewell Youth Theatre has been led and inspired by Sue Stones for 46 years. And I appreciate that this is on a different scale, but Chatsworth House, no less, has given invaluable opportunities to children and young people in the area by having a takeover day at the world-famous stately home. And I must mention Ben Woodruff, our world champion toe wrestler. Yes, it's a thing. Who, as well as being a great bloke and a champion, has raised valuable funds for mental health charity Mind. Madam Deputy Speaker, I hope those days of having a reasonable expectation that your children will do well in life aren't over, but they seem to at least be on pause. A lack of housing, a reduction in opportunity due to political decision-making, unrestrained social media, and a climate crisis means my children are entering adulthood, with much greater uncertainty than I did. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, as a foster carer of teenage children for 24 years, I know how tough it is for young people in general, but it's much harder for young people leaving care now than it used to be just a few years ago, because local authorities are running on fumes. So the support has diminished, and unfortunately, the prejudice against care-experienced young people still persists. Madam Deputy Speaker, the new government must work towards fixing the broken children's social care market, the lack of placement sufficiency, and the profiteering from vulnerable children that is driving our local authorities to the brink of bankruptcy. I didn't even bother to check with the Commons Library. I'm very sure that I'm the first former singer of a progressive metal band to be elected to this House. Although my gigging days are behind me, I think, I'm extremely pleased that the Labour government will seek a deal with the EU to help our touring acts that have suffered no end of red tape getting on to the continent to ply their trade. Madam Deputy Speaker, the UK music industry has been an enormous success story over many decades, and we need to support all of it, not just the multi-million selling acts, but also the ones playing to a couple of hundred people, who will hopefully be tomorrow's multi-million selling acts. Madam Deputy Speaker, during my campaign, I was struck by the sheer number of Derbyshire Dales constituents whose number one priority for an incoming government was either the climate or nature. So I feel empowered to say that as influencers and makers of law, we have a duty to not just think short term and not just think about the next election, but to think about those that haven't even been born yet and leave behind a habitable planet. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I was particularly proud to campaign under a banner of public service, serving our constituents, serving the nation, country first, party second. We're not here for the status. We're here for the people that elected us, and I will try to keep reminding myself of this. We must deliver on our commitments, but we must also treat the staff here, the staff working in our offices, our colleagues in local government, our colleagues in the civil servant, and our constituents with the respect that they deserve. And if we can do that, we'll move this great bastion of democracy a little closer to the people it serves.
Before I call the next member to speak, can I just remind members that due to the pressures on time, there will be an immediate 3-minute time limit with the exception of maiden speeches, who should try and leave their contributions around 7 minutes and certainly no longer. Sir John Hayes.
I'm going to make 5 points in 3 minutes. And if I can pull that off, I'll go up even further in your estimation, I trust. So there are these. The first is that this government, like all governments, need to recognise that the food chain in this country is distorted by the power of a handful of huge corporate retailers. For far too long, they've taken the lion's share, if I can put it this way, of the agricultural cake. And it is critically important that we rebalance the chain in favour of primary and secondary producers. Previous governments have done some work on that with the establishment of a groceries code and an adjudicator. I was in the government when that was set up. But they need to have more teeth to act on sharp practice by retailers who ran ragged over those primary producers. The second point is that we really do need to have a policy, indeed a strategy for food security. That means recognising that food security is as important as energy security. They mustn't be made competitors one with the other. We saw during COVID and after the war with Ukraine just what damage can be done by the unforeseen, the unexpected, to international markets, to supply lines. So it's critically important that we grow more of what we consume. We shorten those supply lines to ensure that our people can be fed by produce that's made here in the United Kingdom. I will happily give way to my...
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend. Is he, like me, disappointed that the Secretary of State didn't say more about the issue of energy security and how we can make sure that the share of food that this country uses, a great amount of it comes from this country?
Well, my honourable friend has been a champion of these matters over a considerable period, but I have hopes
in the Secretary of State. I had a debate just before the recess in which the honourable member for Cambridge participated, making the case for food security, and he gave me a fair hearing. And I look forward to the meeting, which I know he's about to invite me to, where I can bring a group of farmers and growers to have that ongoing conversation. So I have hope. Food security matters is the core point here, and it helps not only with economic resilience, it also assists with traceability, with quality, with standards, all those other things. My third point, and it really was stimulated by the Secretary of State's comments about investment and how we need to think big. We do indeed. To maintain productivity and efficiency in farming and growing, we need to look to the future. And that does mean greater automation, for example. It means changing the way we go about our business in respect of food production. It means greater integration, but not at the expense of the small farmers and growers. You can have an efficient system that doesn't necessarily mean exclusively huge farm businesses, because you need an entry point for the industry. And if you simply create a handful of very large corporate farmers, you won't allow the kind of fluidity that's necessary to maintain the health of the industry. My fourth point will be about procurement. The government needs to use procurement to support British produce. It's not that difficult. No government of any party has got this right. We've made bits of progress over time. Different governments have launched different initiatives, but we do really need to use the public purse to support what we do in this country more effectively. And my final point is this, that we can have a debate about the detail of policy, but as has been said by the Shadow Secretary of State and others, we do need to take a bigger view than the partisan knockabout that too often prevails in this kind of discussion, because this is about the future good of our people, the production of food to feed the nation.
Luke Charters.
Speaker. As chair of the APPG on food security, I've been working across the House to ensure that we work towards affordable food that's available and accessible for everyone. Yet from some of the contributions I've heard from the party opposite, it's clear that over the last 14 years they've not reflected on how they've failed rural communities. We wouldn't be here today if they'd held the mantle on food security, and our farmers already have low confidence because the Conservatives eroded their trust. But our rural communities are not political football. They deserve respect, and they want action and not words. And if the opposition think that rural affairs is a tricky ground for these Labour benches, they can well and truly think again. Yeah. Just look at our new crop of Labour MPs. We won seats right across the country from Scarborough to South Pembrokeshire. The farming community has firm friends on these benches. Yeah. Now let me turn to some of the work this government's doing, from unlocking precision breeding to launching a new deal for farmers. This government's work on food security, though, transcends the work of a single department. For example, seeking to secure a new veterinary agreement to launching GB Energy, which will lower production costs. And we're also paving the way on flood resilience. And may I just draw on some local context in York. Now, I visited a fantastic carrot farm in York Outer, but I was gobsmacked to hear that in a bad year of flooding, they can lose a quarter of their crop. Now, I dread to think about the impacts if we don't turn the tide of climate change. And that's why I absolutely urge the critical resilience funds to continue to support farmers like the one I met. Now, can I just turn to water scarcity, a critical issue? And there are real pressures here. Despite the 18 months of the wettest rain on record, it was been 30 years since we last built a reservoir, and farmers struggle from drought too.
Will my honourable friend give way?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thank you. And as you said earlier, there are many people supportive of farmers on this side of the House, and I'm a really proud farmer's daughter and delighted to speak in this debate. And what I'd like to say is that the previous government sold the farmers down the river. We had disastrous trade deals. Obviously, they suffered from the terrible weather as well. That we can at least say that wasn't the Tories' fault. But will my right honourable friend agree with me that to support, my honourable friend agree with me that to support Welsh farmers in future, we need a strong financial package for them? Thank you.
Well, thank you to my honourable friend. She's a fantastic advocate for her constituents. The agriculture budget is hugely important to protect food security. May I turn to another critical issue, biosecurity? And I was actually disappointed to see the opposition front bench leave this out of their motion, because at the present, the UK has got a number of confirmed cases of blue tongue. And I was briefed by the Deputy Chief Veterinary Officer earlier today. So I welcome the Secretary of State's action around the blue tongue serotype 3 vaccines, and this, coupled with the exclusion zones policy, is a welcome first response to what is a complex crisis actually fuelled by climate change. I won't get into the intricacies of midges and the wind from the continent. And this is actually a clear signal that the government is taking biosecurity seriously. And can I just touch on one of my recent engagement with Sainsbury's? I hope colleagues from across the House will join with me in welcoming food retailers that put food security at the heart of their whole business model. And I'm encouraged by what Sainsbury's are doing. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm conscious of time, but can I just stress that food is one of the 13 critical national infrastructure sectors in the UK. Food security is national security, so I respectfully say to the front bench opposite, stop the politics and work constructively with us on food security. It's great to see the government making progress, and I look forward to working with them to safeguard Britain's national food security.
Ros Savage to make her maiden speech.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, for this opportunity to speak to the House. And I thank my honourable friends for their contributions to this very, very important debate on food and farming. It is an absolute honour to address this chamber as the newly elected Member of Parliament for the South Cotswolds. The South Cotswolds is a new constituency formed from parts of the former Cotswolds and North Wiltshire seats. Sir Geoffrey Clifton Brown continues in his service in the North Cotswolds, while James Gray served North Wiltshire for 27 years. Although Mr Gray's and my political views may differ substantially, he was a dedicated constituency MP, and I hope to follow in his steps in that regard, at least. The Cotswolds has a well-deserved reputation for its natural and architectural beauty. It always gladdens my heart to see the soaring, slender spire of St Mary's Church in Tetbury, or the elegant honeystone buildings around the marketplace in Cirencester, or the awe-inspiring arches of Malmesbury Abbey. We have beautiful villages, including 3 category winners of the best-kept villages in Wiltshire: Ashton Keynes, Seagrey and Hankerton. We have vibrant communities, thriving businesses and visionary innovators and inventors. King Charles had the good taste to choose Highgrove near Tetbury as his country home, and his gardens are well worth a visit. I'm still waiting for my invitation to join His Majesty for an organic green tea at Highgrove. The South Cotswolds is a rural constituency characterised by a rich agricultural landscape and with a proud farming heritage and a plethora of fabulous farmers' markets full of tempting goodies. 87% of the land within the Cotswolds area of outstanding natural beauty is dedicated to agriculture, and we have over 750 farm holdings in the South Cotswolds, employing over 2,000 people. Our beautiful landscape is a diverse mix of crops and grassland, with livestock farming being a significant sector, with cattle, sheep and pigs. I can recommend the Cirencester Livestock Market as probably the best place in the constituency, if not in the country, to get a gargantuan farmer's breakfast that really sets you up for the day, if not for the entire week. The Cotswolds are known for our traditional farming practices, with the majority of the farms being family-run, often for many, many generations. But there's lots of innovation too. Earlier this year, I hosted an event at the Royal Agricultural University in Cirencester, where we heard how many farms in the region are embracing sustainable and regenerative approaches, focusing on soil health, wildlife conservation, and local food production. The Royal Ag itself is leading the field, so to speak, with zero-dig farming methods. But not all is rosy in the Cotswolds garden. Our farmers are frustrated by the absence of a long-term strategy. They need to plan 20 or 30 years ahead, beyond the next electoral cycle. They need a clear vision of the future, a vision that can survive changes of government. And we need to attract more young people into farming. Last year, I helped a couple of farmers to bring in the Brussels sprouts harvest. As I stood in a muddy field on a grey December day, they told me what problems they've had recruiting young people into farming. 38% of farmers are aged 65 or older, and only 15% are under 45. Astonishingly, it seems not many young people enjoy being out in the middle of a field in all weathers, doing hard physical work for very little money. Yet a significant number of them do, but the main obstacle is getting access to land. So I'm pleased to hear that the Secretary of State imply that he will be working to encourage more younger people into farming, making it easier and more rewarding for them to help to feed our country with high-quality food that hasn't travelled halfway around the world. On the southeastern edge of my constituency, a really exciting initiative is underway at the marvellously named Crappers landfill site, where they're leading on sustain circles. Now, this concept aims to meet 80% of a community's food, housing, jobs and energy needs within a defined radius around the community, increasing self-reliance and resilience. So they're pioneering this idea with a plan to position pressurised plastic greenhouses on old landfill zones, using the methane emissions from the decomposing rubbish to heat the greenhouses. They aim to grow enough fruit and vegetables to feed Royal Wootton Bassett, Brinkworth and Malmesbury. We need more creative projects like this. Elsewhere in Wiltshire, a proposal for a massive solar farm on 2,000 acres of mostly agricultural land has sparked debate about how we choose to use our land. And I think we need to stop thinking of housing here, renewables here, and food production here, and look at more creative ways to make our land multi-layered and multi-purpose. It's becoming clearer than ever that we need an integrated strategy, not least because building more houses will increase rainwater runoff and increase the burden on an already overloaded sewage system. In my constituency, last year alone, the Fairford Sewage Treatment Works pumped untreated sewage into the River Colne for 3,391 hours, which equates to over 4.5 months within 1 year. Incidents that are meant to be exceptional are happening on average over 3 times a week. Across the constituency, sewage is flooding into houses, into gardens, and into schools. It's flooding out across fields where cattle consume it, get sick and die. I urge Thames Water to upgrade the Fairford Sewage Works as a matter of the utmost urgency and for Ofwat to make sure that they do. For me, the cleanliness or otherwise of our rivers is personal, and I'd like to share a little background here. I am not from anywhere in particular. My father was a Methodist minister, and my parents moved house for the first time when I was 2 years old, and continued to move house with annoying frequency thereafter. My father's excuse was that he ran out of sermons after a certain number of years, and so we had to move house so that he could recycle them. Now, I'm all in favour of recycling, but I do think he presumed a higher degree of attention and a longer span of memory than the typical church member maybe has. But anyhow, sadly, my parents are no longer around to see me take my seat in this house, but I know they would be proud. They believed that their job was to serve the community above all else, as exemplars of God's love, and I'm honoured to follow in their footsteps. But I digress. Since I've been old enough to choose where I live, I seem to keep coming back to the River Thames. I took my first oar strokes on the Thames in Oxford, and rowed out of Thames Rowing Club in Putney for several years. I've lived in Fulham, Putney, Brentford, Kew, Richmond and Windsor before moving to the Cotswolds. The River Thames rises in my constituency, little more than a trickle just outside Cricklade, gradually gathering tributaries, including the highly polluted Colne, to become the magnificent Father Thames that flows past these Houses of Parliament. So the Thames has been a constant thread throughout much of my adult life. So I care passionately about water issues and about climate and nature more generally. And this is a passion that led me in my 30s to spending an inordinate amount of time alone in a tiny rowboat in the middle of various oceans, as I rowed solo across the Atlantic, Pacific and Indian, using my voyages to raise awareness of environmental issues and our growing ecological crisis. Along the way, I gained some really impressive calluses, 4 Guinness World Records, and hopefully some highly transferable skills in navigating shark-infested waters that may possibly stand me in good stead in my new career. Like many who care about our environment, I sometimes despair. But in closing, I would like to say that what gives me hope for the future is the public spirit, the energy and the goodness that I see in action in the South Cotswolds. When the government is telling us that there is no money and councils are struggling, I see our communities coming together, using their creativity and resourcefulness to work out how to make a little go a long way, sharing resources, looking to their neighbours, donating time and skills, and by looking out for each other. We have fabulous organisations like the Cirencester Pantry, Heels of Malmesbury, and community fridges in Purton, Malmesbury and Tetbury. It's so inspiring to see people coming together in mutual support. People of the South Cotswolds, you inspire me and you humble me. I am so grateful to my constituents for trusting me to represent their interests and those of this country. I commit to doing my absolute best to rise to this challenge with unwavering determination, integrity and dedication. Thank you very much.
Ben Goldsborough.
Mr. Speaker, and it's an absolute honour to follow the honourable member for the South Cotswolds. Hearing your speech and your passion and dedication, not just for the area that you live in, but the environment in general, is inspiring for everyone in the House. So congratulations on your maiden. Of course.
I'm extremely grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way. I would like to just pay a tribute to my neighbour, for I thought what was an excellent maiden speech. I'm very glad that she appreciates the huge beauty of my parts of my former constituency. I know that she will represent it well. I was very sorry to lose it, and I have many friends in that constituency, and I wish her well.
Well, it's lovely to hear a bit of cross-party action to start off, isn't it? So there we go. I'm trying not to spoil that tone. So today's debate is a vital one on the future of not only South Norfolk's food security, but of the UK's. For too long, those who have put food on our table have worked our land, but have sadly been taken for granted. I stand here as the first Labour MP for South Norfolk in 74 years. Madam Deputy Speaker, that should show the House that rural communities up and down the country have wanted change, and it is for us to prove that we are ready to take up that mantle. Now I can't get my paper sorted. In South Norfolk, we are very lucky because we have the innovation of the Norwich Research Park, which, for those who are local, I can see nodding from the Honourable Member for Mid-Norfolk over there, knows that these are the centres of excellence which will drive our agriculture forward in agritech and high-end industry. The innovation of the John Innes Centre is second to none. They have met to meet the increasing demands and pressures on the national and international food security system. The gene editing techniques that they have been developing and working on have the potential to transform British agriculture, increase yields and crop resilience, and to help us face the climate crisis that we are all heading towards. I welcome the news from the front bench that the government will be taking action on precision breeding. It's a great step forward in what we needed to see. There is an incredible opportunity in the heart of South Norfolk to transform our food security and support farmers on the front line dealing with the consequences of climate change, producing more food with less impact on the environment. Madam Deputy Speaker, while we address the challenges facing our farmers and the urgent need to secure our food supply, it is also important to highlight the amazing work of the Earlham Institute. The Earlham Institute is a beacon of life sciences, training and innovation, and their contributions are vital to tackling food insecurity and safeguarding our future. Their cutting-edge research is developing the latest tools and approaches to monitor and predict how diseases evolve and spread. This kind of knowledge is critical for the future of British farming, as it will allow us to anticipate and mitigate the risks that threaten our food security. The Institute's contributions go far beyond research. They're also a hub for training the next generation of scientists and ensuring Britain remains at the forefront of life sciences and agricultural innovation. I'm immensely proud to represent a constituency that is home to such important institutions. The Earlham Institute is doing the hard work necessary to safeguard our food security and supply. Faced with the challenges of water security, sadly do note that was missing from the opposition's motion, that farmers tell me when we meet them that there is a huge barrier in the way of them actually collecting the water that they need and building the reservoirs that they want on their land because of action taken by the Environment Agency. Why on earth should we stand in the way of farmers who want to protect their land from drought and also protect the local areas from flooding risks if they can capture the water that they can use at a lower cost than tapping into the mains water that we all need? I would really hope that my front bench colleagues will work with me to see how we can secure planning reform on this issue so we can have more reservoirs built on farming land to help for food security going forward. Farmers have also raised with me biodiversity net gain regulations. And it's currently slowing down the progress we could have in future food production. I recently visited Fisher Farms, which is just over the border, and as I say, it's a great step forward, and I hope that these are the measures that we can take going forward.
David Chadwick to make his maiden speech.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I stand here as the first ever MP for Brecon, Radnor and Tawe, the largest constituency in England and Wales. Therefore, I have a foot in two worlds, one in rural mid-Wales and the other in the Swansea Valley. And I wish to pay tribute to my predecessors, Faye Jones and Christina Rees, for their commitment to Welsh politics and their service to these communities. The north of the constituency starts in the uplands of Radnorshire, a historic old county featuring the market towns of Knighton, Rhaeadr, the outdoor capital of Wales, and Prestine. Our constituency has three spa towns, Llandrindod Wells, Builth Wells and Llanyrtyd Wells. Builth Wells, of course, is where the Royal Welsh Show, Europe's largest agricultural gathering, takes place each summer. At the centre is my handsome, historic hometown of Brecon, home to the Army in Wales and a thriving Nepalese community. The World Book Town of Hay-on-Wye shows that a small rural town can be a world leader, as does Britain's best high street in Crickhowell, not forgetting the horticultural talents on display in Tawe. At the head of the Swansea Valley is Ystwyth, the birthplace of the British iron industry, and Pontardawe, where the roof of the White House itself was made. This enormous constituency was not created by popular demand, but was welded together following the previous government's decision to cut the number of Welsh constituencies by a fifth. And Wales responded by cutting the number of Welsh Conservative MPs to zero. Welsh farmers will not forget the trade deals they signed with New Zealand and Australia. Wales wants a fairer deal from this Parliament. Yesterday, we debated the challenges facing the NHS in England. Many of my constituents travel to England for NHS treatment. I have tried healthcare systems across the world. I was run over by a car in the Netherlands and was paralysed by Guillain-Barré syndrome in Argentina. It was a tough couple of years. So I've seen how high-quality healthcare changes lives and saves lives. And I'm sorry to say that the Welsh NHS is in dire straits. Its outcomes are worse than in England. Yet no equivalent review is taking place in Wales. Instead, the Welsh Government is forcing health boards to make heavy budget cuts. They're proposing to cut the opening hours at minor injuries units at hospitals in Brecon, Llandrindod Wells and Ystrad, forcing local residents to make long journeys, travelling long distances, relying on roads that are often closed or bus journeys that can take a whole day. People living in rural areas should not have to pay a rural penalty to access healthcare. Indeed, rural areas can help tackle the healthcare crisis that we face. Take obesity. We can lighten the load on our NHS by bettering the nation's diet. If we recognise the true value of good food and local produce, we would appreciate the public health and environmental benefits from the money spent on the agricultural budget. The government must be aware of the massive multiplier effect that the agricultural budget has for the rural economy and should give farmers the stability and the funding they need. Food security is a major concern. 61% of farmers are considering giving up, and the farming workforce is dwindling. Our farmers and growers produce world-class produce, battling harsh weather and constantly changing market conditions. Those market conditions are often set by retail giants, and I know that my predecessor, Roger Williams, fought to level the relationship between retailers and farmers through strengthening the Groceries Code adjudicator, and it's a shame that the Conservatives did not do more to strengthen that code during their time in office. I will carry on that fight. Only this past week have we seen an important campaign from Riverford, holding supermarkets to account for misleading shoppers with fake farm brands and driving Britain's family farms to the brink. And that's just one example of the challenges that farmers face. We need to champion local food systems, not imports. So let's support the movement towards rebuilding local supply chains, driven by a new generation of rural entrepreneurs who are opening restaurants, building brands, bringing back jobs and remaking our high streets. That spirit of innovation flourishes still in Wales. We once had the lead in industrial sciences. We were the world's first industrial nation. But now Wales is £10,000 ahead, poorer than England, and still shedding jobs. For both of my grandfathers, the steel industry was the first rung on the career ladder. One of them climbed the ladders at Port Talbot. But now those ladders have been taken away, and those jobs must be replaced for the families in my constituency who are now facing unemployment before Christmas. And if this government wants to back Welsh industry and Welsh jobs, it can show it by backing the Global Centre for Rail Excellence in Oncloyne. Great Britain has no all-purpose testing centre for railway vehicles and infrastructure, but this former mine has been repurposed to be that facility. Give us the tools and we will get on with it, for we still know how to dig ourselves out of a hole in Wales. We're a creative people. We love music, we love words, we love singing. We love reading about other people, which is why my constituency sustains 3 local newspapers, the Brecon and Radnor Express, the County Times and the Mid Wales Journal, as well as the Ponty Mag, the Beacon and the Ross Gossip. And finally, I'd like to thank my partner Gemma, whose bravery and resourcefulness continue to inspire me, and to my son William and our next soon-to-be-born child who doesn't have a name yet. I'm opting for Enzo, so I'd love the House's support for Enzo. And I dedicate my work here to fighting for the future you deserve. Thank you.
Joe Morris.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and congratulate the honourable member on such an impassioned maiden speech, and wish him very luck in his very best luck in his naming battles as they come on. When I put in to speak for this debate, I was conscious that as the MP for, as I've become very fond of saying, the largest constituency in England, that the agricultural and rural communities have a significant amount of stake in my constituency, that there is a significant contribution they make to my local economy, and that if you were to take the farms out of my constituency, you would not just ruin the economy, but ruin the landscape, ruin the tourism, and undermine countless communities that have existed for centuries. Now, unfortunately, we are in the midst of a crisis in our rural communities. We're in the midst of a depopulation crisis where young people simply cannot afford to remain where they grew up. They cannot find the jobs, cannot find the homes to do so. And we therefore have an ageing population crisis. We see hospitality businesses unable to continue to grow and being forced to close their doors. Now, that is directly linked to the crisis in our farming communities because they are often the customers for those businesses. I, over the weekend, was very privileged to go and visit Goodfellow's farm in Long Whitton on the very eastern border of my constituency. And speaking to him about speaking to the owner about the shape of British farming and the very real crisis that we have inherited from the party opposite. I know that the Shadow Farming Minister is a former Northumberland County Councillor and that he was very gracious in welcoming 3 new Labour members to this place. I thank him for his friendliness and candour in doing so, and just compliment him on the beauty of the Alnwick ward, which I look forward to be campaigning in the local elections coming up. But ultimately, the Hexham constituency voted Labour for the first time ever at the last election because it recognised the crises that we face. And I don't say that to make a hackneyed political point. I say that to make a very real point about the work that I intend, as a very new member, to do in this House, to shine a light on the depopulation crisis that we face. And if I can just gently remind the opposition front bench that we know we've inherited a very broken farming system. I was delighted to welcome the now Secretary of State to my constituency during the general election to meet with local farmers. I'm confident this government and this front bench is listening to them and that we can work to drive up standards in our farming, to drive up and secure generational farms for the future, and to look at how ultimately a department that did manage to underspend £300 million is not one that was functioning properly under the previous government. I don't say that to be overtly political. I say that simply to emphasise that we need a government that works in the interest of communities up and down the Tyne Valley and from the County Durham border up to the Scottish border. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's an honour to follow my constituency neighbour across the border in the Scottish borders. Today's debate is a topic that interests me greatly as the son of a farmer and also as a proud MP for a rural constituency where our farmers, land managers and workers in the rural economy deliver some of the finest produce anywhere in the United Kingdom. We have so many outstanding farmers and food producers in the Scottish borders, it is impossible to name even but half of them. We should be immensely proud of the food and produce and drink produce here on our doorstep. But too often, the concerns and the needs of farmers are taken for granted. They are overlooked by the SNP government at Holyrood, and now they seem to be ignored by the Labour government here at Westminster. Politicians in those parties talk freely of the need for food security, but they don't seem to understand who delivers that food security. They speak of the need for great and high-quality produce without properly recognising the hard work that goes into producing it. They talk of the benefits of reaching net zero targets by managing land effectively and reducing the air miles for food, but don't give enough credit to the farmers who are achieving that. If you wonder what I mean, look no further than this Labour government. The Labour Party manifesto for the recent general election made no mention of its plans for funding for farming.
Would my honourable friend give way?
Yes, happily.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. And I know that lots of farmers in my constituency of Stone, Great Worley and Penkridge are deeply worried about some of the talk of changes to tax regime, not just in terms of inheritance tax, but also capital gains tax, and how that will impact their future viability of their business and the abilities for farms to be farmed by families.
My right honourable friend makes an excellent point, both about the funding arrangements but also about the tax changes which are speculated in the press. Farmers are frankly in the dark about what comes next. There may be budget cuts, there may be financial pain, they don't really know. Now, the government should be listening to NFU Scotland, who recently submitted a detailed budget submission to the United Kingdom government. Let me put on record what that submission said. It underlined the need for an increased multi-annual ring-fenced agriculture and rural economy funding commitment in the budget. Now, Labour must also pay attention to the warning from NFU Scotland. They said without adequate funding from the UK government, the majority of farmers in Scotland would cease to be viable. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, this Labour government cannot do to farmers what they've done to pensioners by cutting their winter fuel payment. The change they promised in the election is already looking hollow to the Scottish and British public. If they go on to cut farmers' funding, that will reveal again that Labour are not on the side of businesses and workers. It will show that all their priorities are wrong. So I do hope they will see sense, listen to our farmers and do the right thing.
Kirstine Sullivan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In addressing food security, I want to begin with food insecurity, because both families and farmers across the UK have seen increasing bills in food and energy because of the chop and change policies from the previous government. Over 12,000 farmers and agribusinesses have been forced out of business since 2010 due to Tory neglect. Furthermore, repeated sell-out trade deals, and we've heard about the botched Brexit deal, have lumbered farming with the lowest profitability of any sector in the economy. And it's important to my constituents in Barclay and Linlithgow and all our constituents that we have a stable and secure supply of food, and where earnings are returned to farmers as profit, not spent on costly energy bills. For households across the country, the cost of energy has undermined personal food security, whilst farming is exposed to skyrocketing energy prices and the soaring cost of animal feed and fertiliser, which is up 44% compared with 2019. Madam Deputy Speaker, in recent months we have heard from some honourable members across the aisle that solar energy farms are a risk to our food security, and I'm very glad that the honourable gentleman who mentioned the NFU president, whose ears must be burning today, because he called for balance when criticisms are made of where and when land is taken out of production. Perhaps the Conservatives could take note of this constructive approach. Madam Deputy Speaker, the farming community has shown great initiative and led on solar energy, something opposition members have failed to recognise. NFU Scotland, having struck a new deal with a major solar energy company, affirmed that the land use required for new solar initiatives will have a marginal impact. This deal involves farmers who know the land best in identifying sites for development and earnings from that partnership. And I believe that this House should welcome such commitment to net zero and to collaborative working. Through cutting energy costs and delivering more revenue directly to farmers, there is the opportunity for a positive future between the farming community and renewable energies. But for farmers, it's not just about energy costs, Madam Deputy Speaker, but also about market access and trade, as we've already heard. And delivering for farmers doesn't just mean fixing the problems of previous botched trade deals. I welcome this government's quick action to ensure our farmers get a fair deal, meaning lower energy costs, increased renewable energy sources, and ensuring that households, including farmers, have the means and the ability to put food on the table.
Luke Taylor to make his maiden speech.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, for giving me the opportunity. It's a pleasure to follow such fine speeches from my honourable friend for Brecon, Radnor and Tawe, whose recollection of the 3 newspapers in his constituency is incredibly impressive, and I encourage him to tell us all about his achievements in those pages over the next few years. Also, the honourable member for the Derbyshire Dales, whose descriptions of Dovedale and Chatsworth House I remember fondly from holidays in my youth, and also playing rugby in Matlock and Ashbourne. And then my honourable friend for the South Cotswolds, whose descriptions of farming as standing in the fields in all sorts of weathers recalls my experiences of playing rugby in the Derbyshire Dales all those years ago. I don't exaggerate when I say it's the honour of my life to serve as the Member of Parliament for Sutton and Cheam. I'm so grateful to the thousands of residents who put their trust in me just a few months ago. I promise them I will always do my very best, and for our communities from Sutton to Worcester Park, Cheam to Belmont and everywhere in between. I hope I'm already going some way to repay the trust they have put in me by voting to end the 2-child benefit cap, voting to save the winter fuel payment, and already helping hundreds of you with issues and concerns through my office. And to the people who didn't vote for me, or didn't vote at all, who have lost all faith in politics and its servants, please allow me the opportunity to restore some of that trust. To my predecessor, Paul Scully, thank you for your 9 years of public service to Sutton and Cheam. Politically, we agreed on very little, but I know you did what you thought was best for our residents. I also take the opportunity to pay tribute to my Lib Dem predecessor, Paul Burstow, who served for 18 years and whose name is still fondly remembered by so many residents on the doorstep. And to my loved ones, my wife and children, my mum and dad, I would not be here without your support. As the father of the house may remember, my dad stood against him in Gainsborough in 92 and 97. Therefore, I must thank him too for helping to ensure that I am the first member of my family to find themselves in this place rather than my old man. Sutton Cheam is small, but it is perfectly formed. It is the smallest of all the 72 Liberal Democrat constituencies. Our boundaries have remained largely unchanged for 80 years, which alone must prove that Sutton and Cheam is the greatest constituency in the country. They got it right in 1945 and they haven't felt the need to change it ever since. I could give you a guided tour of our beautiful constituency, but for me, it's the people who make up our community and make Sutton and Cheam what it is. We've got recyclers, repairers and reusers, improving sustainability and protecting our planet. We have litter pickers, bulb planters and neighbourhood watchers, making our area safer and cleaner and better to live in. We have Sutton fans, Dons fans, Palace fans, Chelsea fans, and even the odd long-suffering Spurs supporter. We've had recent arrivals of Hong Kongers and Ukrainians and Afghanis coming to Sutton to find a new home. We have long-established communities of Tamils, Ahmadiyas, Jews, Hindus, Sikhs and Muslims. We have Anglicans and atheists, Catholics and Methodists, all building the unique mosaic of our communities. Our local football team, Sutton United FC, play at Gander Green Lane in my council ward, where their fight to rejoin the Football League continues. A recent pointer piece from other Lib Dem constituents, Eastleigh and Yeovil, are going to help us get there. But the generous people of Woking gave us 3 points only 2 weeks ago. So I thank my honourable friend for that. The football club proves every year, with their fantastic community outreach work, the value of our local football clubs. In politics and football, the people of Sutton know that their colour truly is amber. That's why they've had a Liberal Democrat-run council for almost 40 years, our longest-running local administration in the country. But as many of my colleagues will know, there is only so much that councils and councillors can do to tackle the biggest problems that governments have failed to solve for years. That is why I decided to run for election to this House, to tackle the national issues that people in my constituency face. For as long as I can remember, I've wanted to fix things. I went from building Lego as a child to rebuilding gearboxes as a teenager. I attended my local comprehensive school in rural Lincolnshire, and growing up, many of my friends and classmates were involved in the critical work that farmers do to keep food on our table and act as stewards for our environment, vital tasks that this debate correctly highlights. At school, I served as a prefect alongside the honourable member for Keighley and Ilkley. And whilst our political paths have diverged since we worked together last, more than 20 years ago, to arrange the Deaston School's sixth form leavers ball, I'm proud that we are part of the largest cohort of state-educated MPs in history. My passion for fixing things led me to London, to Imperial College to study engineering, which led to many years working in the transport industry around the world. But there is so much more that needs fixing in our country than planes, trains and automobiles. Raising my family in Sutton and Cheam with my wonderful wife, I've seen firsthand the broken cogs and blown fuses across our public services, from the NHS and social care to education and to policing. In today's Britain, the social contract has been broken. In our politics, cynicism and self-interest have replaced service and duty. And many feel that it is simply no longer true that if you work hard and play by the rules, you'll enjoy the security and opportunity that everyone deserves. A fair deal no longer exists between the British state and the people, and this is evident across every policy area. As an engineer, I feel confident in saying the very foundations of our country are broken, and it's time we picked up our tools to fix them. As the Lib Dem frontbench spokesperson for our capital, I will hold the government to account for all Londoners. Fixing London's creaking infrastructure, a never-ending housing crisis, pushing for reform of and proper funding for the Met. And if you've been listening to the Lib Dems for the last few years, you'll know exactly what the River Thames is full of. There is much to be said on all of these topics, but I'd like to finish today by highlighting one that is dear to me and my constituents: hospices. One of the first emails I received after being elected was from our local hospice, St Ralph's, searching for help to stop £1 million worth of funding cuts, which would see staff made redundant and clinical services slashed. These cuts will put Sutton's GPs, hospitals and district nurses under huge and unmanageable pressure. They will leave families abandoned, unsupported and in genuine distress at a time when they need kindness and support the most. And for the patient, these cuts could tragically hasten their passing and deny them their dignity. In this Parliament, we have an opportunity to build a better plan so that people have somewhere to spend their final days in the comfort and care we all as human beings deserve. I look forward to working with members from across the House if they'll pick up their tools with this engineer who knows a thing or two about fixing things. Because together we can fix our country, we can restore trust and we can deliver hope. Thank you.
Mike Reader.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Could I just start by paying my respects to the resident who died in my constituency during the recent floods? I'm sure the thoughts of the whole House are with her family. And thank the Secretary of State for visiting Northamptonshire, leaving Labour conference early to make sure we had the support we needed, as over 1,000 residents in Northampton South were evacuated from their homes. And thank you to the honourable member from Sutton and Cheam. Commiserations to his father on his election losses, but I'm sure he's very proud to see his son sitting on the green benches. Madam Deputy Speaker, I unfortunately can't support the Opposition Day motion as it's written. I do believe we should support all possible opportunities for our farmers in terms of funding, but this motion seeks to commit this government to underfunded and in some cases imaginary policies proposed by the former Prime Minister on the in May 2024, policies that have contributed to the £22 billion black hole that this party has inherited. These policies were political gestures and not a real offer to the farming community in the UK, and people saw through that. 61% of people told Farmers Weekly they trusted a Labour government, compared to only 6% trusting the Conservatives.
Will my honourable friend agree that the presence on this side of the benches of so many MPs like myself representing Labour with a farming background, and so many seats now semi-rural represented by Labour, that it is true we're who the real champions now are of our farming communities?
Thank you for the intervention. I think it's very clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, that Labour is on the side of our farming and agricultural sector. And I stand here today as the hopeful chair of the APPG for Food. I'm sure those who are concerned about food security will be joining us at the IGM very shortly, and also a member of the NFU's Food and Farming Fellowship. It's very clear that members on this side of the House are taking this issue very seriously, and we're dedicating time to ensure that, unlike the former government, we are working with farmers, not against them. But we're also working cross-industry. And whilst this motion focuses solely on farming, in order to deliver food security, I'm sure everyone in the House recognises that the approach must be cross-sector. That should include food manufacturing, logistics, retail and the hospitality supply chain. The whole agri-food ecosystem delivers a GVA of £147 billion to our economy, 15 billion of that through our farming sector and a whopping 70 billion through our manufacturing, distribution and wholesale sector in food and retail. And if we want to improve food security in the UK, which is already classified as broadly stable by DEFRA, then oh yes, of course.
the question of stability. Can I remind my honourable friend of the opening lines of Labour's 2010 food and farming strategy? We can't go on just as we are. Farmers in my constituency I've met would make exactly the same claim about the record of this previous Conservative government, who went on in 2010 to scrap Labour's food plan. Does he agree with me? If we are to invest in food and farming and bring jobs and prosperity to rural and urban constituencies, we need to back Labour's New Deal for farmers, invest in food and farming jobs, and have a real plan for food security back on the table again.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I couldn't have said it better myself, thank you. I do argue, though, that subsidies, funding and investment must be holistic in their approach across the whole ecosystem. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, the reason I also chose to speak today is food security is personally important to me and my constituents. A recent study found that in Northampton, nearly 10% of people struggle to access food, and that gets worse in rural Northamptonshire, which I'm sure my neighbouring honourable member will recognise. Northamptonshire ARCE found that 45% of residents in rural Northamptonshire were worrying about food prices, and 22% of families with children, adults, missed meals in order to feed their kids. That simply isn't good enough. Madam Deputy Speaker, I commend the opposition on supporting the government's efforts to improve food security, but this motion isn't the way to do it. We must work together, collaboratively and cross-party to support the agri-food industry, and I hope they'll endeavour to do so after this Opposition Day motion is passed. Defeated. Thank you.
Dr Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We have the best farmers in this country who produce food to the highest animal welfare standards, and we should be very proud. Food security is a key part of national security. I urge the government to look at the EFRA Select Committee's report from the last Parliament on food security. The previous government took on the recommendations of an annual food security report, and I urge the government to continue with that. The government must protect the farming budget and not cut it. It must protect land and not bulldozer it with solar. We've got to make sure that solar goes in the right places, on industrial buildings, in brownfield, on rooftops, but not on prime food-producing land. We must also protect the inputs. In the last few years, we've lost the ability to produce a lot of fertiliser in the United Kingdom, and we need to make sure that we look at that in terms of resilience. Biosecurity is a key part of national security. As we have heard, we have a lot of cases of blue tongue now in the south and the east of England. We know what happened in the last couple of years with avian influenza, and we have African swine fever advancing up the continent. The government must act and must support the Animal and Plant Health Agency. It is in urgent need of a full redevelopment. The EFRA Select Committee have called for that, and I know that the DEFRA department wants it, so I urge ministers to make the case to Treasury to fund that in full.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. He guested on the Public Accounts Committee last year when we had a full inquiry into this. There is a real need for proper capital investment in here because the biosecurity of the nation is at risk from not having properly biosecure laboratories.
I thank the Chair of the Public Accounts Committee for that. It's so important that the government listens to this and funds the redevelopment of the APHA in full. My journey into politics started in 2001 when we had the outbreak of foot and mouth. And I've seen the implications then. I saw sites then I never want to see again in my lifetime. And we've seen what happens when biosecurity breaks down. This touches on some of the mental health impacts that have been touched on in the debate today. I'll happily give away. Yep.
Thank you very much, Maron, for giving way on that point about farmers' mental health. As my neighbouring MP, would you join me in championing Yana, a local charity that now is stretching into Essex called You Are Not Alone, which actually supports the mental health of farmers and rural workers?
Thank the honourable member for that intervention. I'd be happy to champion Yana and RABI, Yellow Wellies, all the institutions and charities that support mental health. I urge the government to look at the EFRA Select Committee's report last year on rural mental health that touches on many of these issues with key recommendations. We need to support our farming communities when they have serious things happen, like flooding, like disease outbreaks as well. When you have more chronic things happening, when periodic TB testing and you get a positive result on the farm. We need to make sure that farmers, vets, everyone are supported with their mental health. It is so important. We've talked about flooding today. People in rural communities and in urban communities in flood risk areas, they have the anxiety of worrying about being flooded. Then they have the trauma of being flooded. I urge ministers, you will be, I apologise, I didn't speak, but ministers will be called out in their wellies in floods. And these communities need to be supported when the waters go down and when the blue lights leave. That is a key recommendation of our report as well. We need to protect the farming budget, and we need to make sure that the money goes out in terms of the Farming Recovery Fund to support flooded communities. We can help our farming communities, we can help our food-producing communities. We encourage people to buy British. I pay tribute to the NFU, the Honourable Member for Bosworth, for the Buy British campaign that all the British supermarkets have signed up to as well. We need to support our local communities to eat local, buy local. That's so good for local communities. It's also good for the animals as well in terms of reducing distance time to slaughter and also reducing food miles. Give way.
I'm grateful to Mile for giving way. As a distinguished vet, he's making a powerful case as well on welfare standards. Would you agree with me that one of the great prizes of British agriculture is it sets such high welfare standards? And one of the things the last government did was the legislation on transport of animals and setting ever higher standards for UK farmers.
Absolutely, and that was a key bill that came through. Animal welfare is something that unites us in humanity across this House, and I urge us to work cross-party to support that. And as I said, farmers in this country produce to the highest animal welfare standards, and we should be proud and we should protect them. Finally, I'll carry on if I'll give way just quickly.
We'll give way. My understanding is that the 2019 Conservative Party manifesto said, when we leave the EU, we'll be able to encourage the public sector to buy British to support our farmers and reduce environmental costs. What went wrong?
I thank the Honourable Member for his intervention. I'll finish up now by saying food security is national security, biosecurity is national security. We must protect both.
Jill Taylor.
Madam Deputy Speaker, my granddad was a tenant dairy farmer, and I know that rural communities like mine feel let down by the party opposite. I spoke earlier about a close family friend who took his own life following a farm inspection. Many of the farmers let down and forced out of producing food were my clients when I practised as a high street solicitor in North Warwickshire. They could have done with the 300 million that the party opposite failed to allocate in support for rural farmers. They needed a better inspection regime that worked for them and consumers. I was inspired recently visiting Aldi, who have their national headquarters in my constituency, passionate about British food and forming good relationship with local farmers. The agricultural and food industry sector contributes 148 billion to the economy and provides 4.2 million jobs in the UK, including many jobs in my constituency. But the party opposite created a cost of living crisis that forced families to buy less fresh food because they couldn't afford it, particularly vegetables, squeezing our local farmers further. Because the last government did not prioritise energy or food security, farmers were crippled by escalating energy prices, animal feed and fertiliser prices. The last government's chop and change approach to rolling out ELM schemes left farmers reeling with uncertainty, and it's no wonder that they and their representatives are looking to this government for much needed reassurance. We need to reassure our farmers and give them the confidence to invest for the future. We need to make sure that they know that this government has their back. Rural and freight crime in my constituency, like many others, has become intolerable. The party opposite left rural criminals to roam free, with crime in rural areas spiralling out of control. Farmers losing valuable equipment essential to the running of their businesses. And to add insult to injury, they are often the ones left to clear up fly tipping. I'm glad to be part of a party and a government that will take rural crime seriously, with a cross-government rural crime strategy is the first of its kind that we've seen. This strategy will crack down on issues like fly tipping and antisocial behaviour that affect rural communities like mine. Apologies, lost my place. I'm working, and I'm sorry, I'm looking forward.
Order. The time's up, I'm afraid. Carla Lockhart.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I rise today to proudly voice my support for the 27,000 farming families across Northern Ireland who day in and day out work tirelessly to help feed our nation. I also stand for the 100,000 people employed in the agri-food sector, directly or indirectly, and for the 10 million people across the UK who consume Northern Ireland's top quality produce on a daily basis. We on these benches take great pride in the fact that Northern Ireland sets a high bar for food quality, animal welfare and environmental standards. Our farms are committed to sustainable practices, ensuring that food is produced responsibly and with respect for our landscapes and ecosystems, despite the efforts of those who unfairly criticise our farming community and treat them as scapegoats for climate change. Our farmers should be seen as partners, not problems. They're already working with some of the most rigorous environmental regulations and should be recognised for the role in meeting climate targets across the UK. Farmers are and always have been the best custodians of our land. They must be enshrined in UK policy, given a seat at the table for key discussions and supported financially to ensure that they can work to continue their vital work. However, not all is well in the industry. Northern Ireland is grappling with the daily impacts of the Protocol and the Windsor Framework, which have created significant uncertainty. Our agri-industry is subject to over 120 EU laws to which we have no democratic say. Our agriculture sector faces unnecessary trade barriers and supply chains, issues that complicate the movement of goods between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. I will certainly agree.
Would the member agree that one of the most pernicious impacts of the protocol is that the veterinary medicines, so vital to the health of animals in Northern Ireland, are about in a few months to be stopped by the European Union, coming from Great Britain, because they insist that it's their veterinary agency which should control these matters?
Absolutely, I agree wholeheartedly with the honourable member. The growing uncertainty over the availability of veterinary medicines in Northern Ireland because of the protocol poses a grave threat to the agri-food sector and animal welfare. If a permanent solution is not reached now, Northern Ireland risks losing access to over 1,700 vital veterinary products, around 51% of its current medicine portfolio, as per the BVA's advice. This will have a devastating consequences not only for farmers and their livestock, but also for consumers and companion animals like cats, dogs and horses. Without these essential medicines, animal health and disease control will be severely compromised, leaving our agricultural sector and the broader public exposed to significant risks. This is a 2024 problem, not a 2025 problem. It needs fixed. We also have the unsatisfactory situation around the transport of second-hand farm machinery from Great Britain to Northern Ireland due to requirements like a phytosanitary certificate just because there might be soil on the wheels. Then we have the 11th hour U-turn on the UK-wide not-for-EU labelling policy, demonstrating no sign of willingness to mitigate the Irish Sea border. An outrageous move on the part of the government, but not surprising given the continued bending to the EU and big business. This government have demonstrated their complete disregard for Northern Ireland in this regard. We also have the ongoing issues around potatoes coming from Scotland to Northern Ireland and the plants. The list goes on. These issues are far from resolved. They need addressed. On top of these difficulties, our farming community is dealing with the rising cost of living, energy prices and volatile farm gate prices. I would encourage and call on the government to ensure that funding for agriculture in Northern Ireland is adjusted in line with inflation. and that would sit around 389 million. Our farmers need certainty, and that means a ring-fence support package that extends beyond short-term budget cycles, ideally for at least 10 years. In conclusion, the message is clear: no farmers, no food. They need our support. Thank you.
And I will be starting front bench speeches at 6:50, so Chris Hinchliffe is the last voice of the back benches.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I don't doubt members opposite's motivation, but the inescapable fact is that the party opposite is ideologically incapable of putting forward the real solutions to bolstering our national food security. I share some of their concerns about the use of high-quality farmland for ground-mounted solar schemes, which is an ongoing issue in North East Hertfordshire, and we do need a land use framework to give strategic direction to where we generate solar energy that we need, instead of allowing a chaotic proliferation of profit-driven schemes wherever grid capacity, which their party failed to sort out, allows. But under their government, just 5% of warehouses had installed rooftop solar, nor did the previous government take any of the obvious steps to mandate solar panels on new build houses or car parks. For 14 years, they allowed this situation to develop unchecked, and it will be this Labour government that delivers the land use strategy that we need to provide a framework to ensure that we are making the best possible use of our finite land. To turn to some of the other challenges, it is estimated that 1/3 of UK soils are degraded, but the previous government ditched the planned Soil Health Action Plan for England. On biodiversity, the previous Conservative government authorised the use of harmful pesticides, despite knowing this would have a devastating impact on pollinators. And on new entrants, it is well known that the average age of farmers is too high, yet when they were in power, the Conservative Party austerity measures led to the closure of 15,000 acres of county farms estate, which are crucial to getting younger people onto a farming career and contributing to national food security. I'll close that.
I call Opposition Spokesperson Robbie Moore.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Food security is national security, and in a time of rising global uncertainty, we must support the British farmer and the British food and drink sector to deliver high-quality domestic food for our economy and our national security. And that means providing farmers and growers with the certainty that they deserve. But unfortunately, Madam Deputy Speaker, in recent weeks and over the course of this debate, we have seen what happens when you put a member for one of the least rural constituencies in the country in charge of the countryside. £50 million of the Farm Recovery Fund not yet paid out. £75 million ring-fenced for internal drainage boards, not yet distributed. £220 million for farm innovation and productivity grants, no commitment. And reports that the farming budget is about to be slashed, leaving uncertainty and farmers facing a cliff edge. Madam Deputy Speaker, whilst the first assault of this Labour government has been on pensioners right across the country, I fear that farmers are next on Labour's hit list. Now, the Secretary of State has had the chance in this debate to stand up for farmers and confirm the farming budget and other schemes would be protected. Instead, he seems to have already surrendered to the Chancellor, suggesting a cut of £100 million. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, I fear that it will be much more. In fact, as we know, Labour could only bring themselves to include 87 words in their manifesto on their plan for farmers, in contrast to our Conservative government's commitment to food security and our rural sector by putting food at the centre of policy making. We introduced the Food Security Index, an annual food security report, and we set out plans to introduce legally binding targets to enhance our food security. And we established the Farm to Fork Summit, held at Downing Street, bringing together key stakeholders from across the food and farming sector, all to ensure the government's departments were aligned on this agenda. And that's because we were willing to look farmers in the eye, engage directly with the whole of the agricultural sector and make sure that their priorities were heard across the whole of the government. So I ask the Minister, why is the Prime Minister not guaranteeing the same level of engagement and the same level of reporting? Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like to congratulate new members for giving their maiden speeches. The member for Derbyshire Dales, South Cotswolds, Brecon and Radnor, and of course my honourable friend, the member for Sutton and Cheen, who I shared a place at school, our local comprehensive in Lincolnshire. And I look up to the gallery and I see not only his mother, but my secondary school teacher looking down at me from the public gallery. And I would like to welcome Mrs. Taylor to the House. And I'm sure that she'll be very proud of her son who has got a seat on these benches. But what we all collectively agree on in our speeches across the House right now is the need for certainty for our farmers. And at a time when farmers need to plan, Labour is offering them a farming manifesto that would be placed on a postcard. And that is exactly why we've had to secure this debate today, bringing the ministers from the department to the chamber, all with the best interests of giving our new Labour government the best chance to stand up for our farmers. But we have seen in the last 100 days in office, the Secretary of State is too weak to stand up for our farmers, and too weak to even stand up for his own department against the Chancellor's red pen. Now, has been indicated, we have experienced the wettest 18 months on record that cannot go unanswered, and thousands of farmers across the country are being crippled by crop losses and damage to their fields. In fact, Madam Deputy Speaker, farmers are already fearing for their second year without any crop at all. The £50 million pledged by the last Conservative government, designed to specifically support farmers hit by flooding, was ready to go when we left office. But yet, speaking to farmers on the ground, they haven't seen a penny of it. So where is that money? And why has it not been delivered to the farmers who desperately need it? The previous Secretary of State and I also pledged £75 million for internal drainage boards to give them the investment that they need to protect the worst-hit agricultural land from flooding in the future. Yet, again, some of small amounts have been released, but the vast majority of these funds have not been released by the department. So why is this the case? We know that the Labour Party's grasp on the public finances is tenuous at best, but this is vital money for our farmers, with businesses on the brink of collapse. So do the ministers opposite realise that this is, for every day that goes by without this support, another farmer gets closer to shutting up their shop? So, Madam Deputy Speaker, Labour has a choice in this debate and in bringing forward this budget this month. So my advice to the Secretary of State is to pick up the phone, speak to the Chancellor, back British farming, fight for the farming budget in full and deliver for farmers up and down the country.
Daniel Zeigner.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to close the debate. The honourable gentleman spoke for so long it won't be possible to answer many of the questions he posed. But I'm also grateful to have the opportunity to show my gratitude and support to farmers working hard up and down the nation, working to feed the nation and protect our environment up and down the country. Now, I've had some excellent first speeches from new members today, and I want to pay tribute to them. From Derbyshire Dales, we heard about the housing crisis. We heard about the beauty of the constituency, from toe wrestling to Chatsworth. From South Cotswolds, we also heard about a beautiful constituency and the glorious breakfasts available in Cirencester, a eulogy to the Thames, but importantly also the point about young new entrants being able to enter farming, which is a passion of mine and something that we will be pursuing with vigour. We heard from the member for Brecon, Radnor, Tawe about the beautiful spa towns and about the health issues that he's faced in health systems, and I very much recognise the points he made. And the honourable member from Sutton and Cheen, who talked about his internationally diverse community with real passion. We've also had excellent speeches from a range of people, from York Alta talking about water scarcity, from my honourable friend from South Norfolk who talked about the need for reservoirs, from the honourable member for Hexham, who again talked about depopulation and the need to get young people into farming, from the honourable member for Bathgate and Linlithgow, who endorsed the very sensible call from the President of the National Farmers Union, calling for sensible balance on our attitude to solar farms, and from the honourable member for Northampton South, who talked about food hardship. We heard from the member from North East Hertfordshire in her powerful intervention about the mental health issues and challenges facing our farmers, and also about the challenges of rural crime, and from the member from North East Hertfordshire on the need for a land use framework. And I have to say, listening to the honourable members opposite, they don't seem to have grasped the level of their own failure. The Conservative government failed farmers and rural communities. We've heard about the low levels of confidence, 12,000 businesses going out of businesses, input costs and energy costs spiralling. That's why rural communities voted them out in their droves. It's going to be very, very different in the future. Now, we've heard the complaints about budgets for the future. As I'm sure that the honourable members, right honourable members opposite, had the experience to know how spending reviews work. So they will find out. They will find out in time where the money is. But of course, given they've spent the money many times over, they know the problems. They know the problems that we're having to clear up of. And what we've heard is the need for stability in the future to overcome the economic problems that we've inherited from that failed government. So let me conclude by saying that farmers are the backbone of rural communities, our environment, our economy, but they face multiple challenges, from flooding and droughts to soaring input costs and rural crime. And we need a proper long-term strategy that works. So we'll do away with the sticking plaster approach we've seen for the last few years. Replace it with a new deal for farmers that genuinely will boost farmers' resilience in the face of climate change and wider external shocks. We will work in partnership with farmers, listen to their concerns and their ideas, and tackle the root causes of the long-term issues they continue to face. Only then, after those discussions, after those considerations, will it be possible to deliver the changes farmers really, really want to see. And in summary, Madam Deputy Speaker, what I would say that will be is a long-term approach, a Labour approach, and that will be an approach that's good for farms, good for consumers, good for the environment, good for nature, and frankly, a real change from the short-term quick-fix operators now deservedly relegated to the opposition benches.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no.
No!
No! Division, clear the lobby. On the order paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes, Louis French and Mike Wood. Tellers for the noes, Kay Mather and Jen Kitchen. order.
The ayes to the right, 187. The noes to the left, 359. 359.
The ayes were 187. The ayes were 187. The noes were 359. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock.